Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the heaviest secrets. Sarah Martinez walked through the gates of Lincoln High School on a crisp September morning, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder, and her father's military dog tags hidden beneath her simple cotton shirt. She had no idea that in just 3 months, her carefully guarded secret would turn her tormentors into her most respectful classmates, and that the girl they mocked for her thrift store clothes and shy demeanor was actually the daughter of Admiral James Martinez, the youngest 4-star admiral in the U.S. Navy's history. What started as typical teenage cruelty would become a lesson that none of them would ever forget, proving that you never really know who you're dealing with until it's too late to take back the damage you've caused. Sarah Martinez stepped off the yellow school bus at Lincoln High School, clutching her faded denim backpack against her chest like a shield. The September air carried the scent of fallen leaves and fresh possibilities. But Sarah felt nothing but dread settling in her stomach. This was her 7th school in 4 years, and she had learned not to get her hopes up about making friends or fitting in. The red brick building loomed before her, 3 stories of teenage hierarchy and social landmines that she would have to navigate alone. Other students streamed past her, chattering excitedly about summer vacations and new classes, their designer backpacks and trendy clothes marking them as locals who belonged. Sarah looked down at her own outfit, a simple white t-shirt from Target, jeans that were a size too big and sneakers that had seen better days. She had learned to shop at thrift stores and discount retailers, not because her family couldn't afford better, but because moving so frequently made expensive clothes impractical. Her father had dropped her off early that morning before heading to his new assignment at the naval base 30 miles away. Admiral James Martinez was a decorated war hero, the youngest person ever to achieve 4-star rank in the U.S. Navy, but to Sarah he was simply Dad, the man who had raised her alone since her mother died when she was 8. The constant relocations were part of military life, something civilian families rarely understood. Every few years, sometimes sooner, they would pack up their lives and start over somewhere new. "Just be yourself, Mija," her father had said as he kissed her forehead goodbye. "And remember, we don't need to announce our business to everyone we meet." This was their code, their unspoken agreement. Sarah had learned early that being the daughter of a high-ranking military officer came with complications. Some people treated her differently when they knew, either with uncomfortable deference or unrealistic expectations. Others resented what they perceived as privilege, not understanding the sacrifices that came with her father's career. The missed birthdays during deployments, the holidays spent on military bases far from extended family, the constant goodbyes to friends she would never see again. So Sarah had perfected the art of being invisible. She kept her head down, spoke only when spoken to, and never mentioned her father's rank or the reason for their frequent moves. She told people he worked on the base, which was technically true, and let them assume he was just another enlisted man or low-level officer. The hallways of Lincoln High buzzed with the energy of a new school year. Sarah found her way to the main office, where a tired-looking secretary handed her a class schedule and a map of the building. Her first period was American history with Mrs. Peterson in room 204. Sarah climbed the stairs slowly, trying to memorize the layout and avoid the clusters of students who seemed to own the corridors. She slipped into the classroom just as the bell rang, scanning for an empty seat.
The only one available was in the back corner, next to a girl with perfectly straightened blonde hair and a Louis Vuitton bag casually draped over her chair. Sarah sat down quietly, pulling out a simple spiral notebook and a mechanical pencil from the dollar store.
The girl next to her, whose name tag read Madison, looked Sarah up and down with barely concealed disdain. Her gaze lingered on Sarah's thrift store clothes and discount supplies, and Sarah saw the exact moment when Madison categorized her as not worth knowing. It was a look Sarah had seen many times before, in many different schools. Mrs. Peterson called for attention and began taking attendance. When she reached Sarah's name, she asked her to stand and introduce herself to the class. "I'm Sarah Martinez," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. "My family just moved here from Virginia." "What brings you to our little town?" Mrs. Peterson asked with the encouraging smile. Sarah hesitated for a moment, feeling 30 pairs of eyes on her. "My dad got transferred for work." "What kind of work does he do?" Madison asked loudly, clearly fishing for information she could use to place Sarah in the school's social hierarchy. "He works on the naval base," Sarah replied, technically truthful but deliberately vague. Madison smirked and whispered something to her friend Emma, who sat in front of her. Sarah caught the words military brat and probably poor, and felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She sat down quickly, hoping the attention would move away from her. The rest of the morning followed a similar pattern. In each class, Sarah introduced herself with the same careful words, revealing nothing about her father's actual position or their real circumstances. At lunch, she sat alone at a table in the corner of the cafeteria, eating the sandwich she had packed from home while watching the various social groups maintain their territorial boundaries. Madison's group held court at the center table, their expensive clothes and casual arrogance marking them as the school's social elite. Sarah observed them with the detached interest of an anthropologist, noting how they used clothing brands and family connections as currency, how they excluded others with subtle cruelty disguised as preference. "Look at the new girl," Madison said loudly enough for Sarah to hear, eating alone with her sad little sandwich. "I bet she made it herself because her family can't afford the cafeteria food." Emma giggled. "Did you see her backpack?" "I think it's from Walmart. And those shoes, are those from the thrift store?" "Probably," Madison replied. "Military families don't make much money. My dad says they're basically government welfare cases." Sarah's jaw tightened at the insult to military families, but she forced herself to stay silent. She had learned that responding to bullies only made them worse. Instead, she finished her lunch quickly and spent the rest of the period in the library where she could hide among the stacks and avoid further confrontation. The afternoon brought more of the same. In English class, when students were asked to share what they did over the summer, Sarah mentioned visiting her aunt in San Diego. She didn't mention that the visit included a private tour of the USS Midway Museum, where her father was treated like a celebrity by the crew. She didn't mention the formal dinners with other high-ranking officers, or the weekend spent at the Admiral's Club overlooking the harbor. In math class, when the teacher asked if anyone had traveled internationally, Sarah remained silent. She didn't mention the summer she had spent in Japan when her father was stationed there, or the trip to Germany when he received a commendation from NATO commanders.
These experiences felt like they belonged to a different person, a different life that had no place in the careful anonymity she cultivated. By the end of her first day, Sarah had successfully established herself as exactly what she appeared to be, a quiet military kid with little money and no social connections.
Madison and her friends had already dismissed her as irrelevant, which was exactly what Sarah wanted. Being ignored was infinitely preferable to being the center of unwanted attention. She boarded the bus that afternoon with relief, settling into a seat near the front where she could avoid the louder students in the back. Through the window, she watched Lincoln High School fade into the distance and wondered how long they would stay this time. Her father's assignments typically lasted 2 to 3 years, but sometimes circumstances changed quickly in the military. She had learned not to get too attached to any one place. At home, she found her father in his study, still in his dress uniform from a formal meeting at the base. The sight of him in his ceremonial regalia, with its rows of ribbons, gold braids, and 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders, was such a stark contrast to the image she projected at school that it almost felt surreal. "How was your first day, Mija?" he asked, looking up from a stack of classified briefings. "Fine," Sarah replied automatically, "just like all the others." Admiral Martinez studied his daughter's face, recognizing the subtle signs of a difficult day. He had watched her navigate military life with grace and maturity far beyond her years, but he sometimes worried about the toll it took on her. The constant moving, the need for secrecy about his position, the way she had learned to make herself invisible to avoid complications. "Did you make any friends?" he asked gently. Sarah shrugged. "It's only been 1 day. Besides, you know how it goes. It's easier to stay under the radar." Her father nodded, understanding the wisdom in her approach but wishing things could be different. He had achieved everything he had dreamed of professionally, but the cost to his daughter's social life weighed heavily on him. She had grown up in a world of military protocol and classified information, learning to guard their family secrets as carefully as any intelligence officer. "Sarah," he said carefully, "you know that you don't always have to hide who we are, right?" "I mean, I understand the reasons, but if you ever want to tell people, it's better this way, Dad," Sarah interrupted. "Trust me. I know what happens when people find out. Either they treat me weird or they get weird about it."
"This is just easier," Admiral Martinez wanted to argue, wanted to tell his daughter that she should be proud of their family and their service to the country.
But he also knew that she was probably right. Military families, especially those with high-ranking officers, often faced unique social challenges in civilian communities. Severin, people either put them on pedestals or resented them for their perceived advantages, never seeing them as just normal families trying to make their way in the world. That evening, Sarah did her homework at the kitchen table while her father prepared dinner. It was their routine. He cooked, she cleaned up afterward. Despite his demanding career, Admiral Martinez had always made time for the domestic aspects of raising his daughter. He had learned to braid her hair, help with school projects, and navigate the complicated world of teenage emotions, often while managing international military operations and high-level strategic planning. As they ate dinner together, Sarah told him about her classes and teachers. Carefully editing out the social dynamics and the comments from Madison's group, she had learned to protect her father from the smaller cruelties of her daily life, knowing that he carried enough weight on his shoulders without worrying about teenage drama. "The history teacher seems nice," she said. "And the math teacher is apparently really good at preparing students for AP calculus." "That's good," her father replied. "Education is something they can never take away from you, no matter how many times we move." It was something he had told her many times over the years, his way of helping her see the positive side of their unconventional lifestyle. Each school brought new teachers, new perspectives, new opportunities to learn and grow. Sarah had become remarkably well-rounded as a result, adapting quickly to different educational styles and making the most of whatever resources were available. After dinner, Sarah retreated to her room to finish her homework and set up her space for the new school year. Her room was sparse but functional. She had learned not to accumulate too many possessions that would be difficult to pack and move. The walls held only a few carefully chosen items: a photo of her and her father at her 8th grade graduation, a map of the world with pins marking all the places they had lived, and a small American flag that had flown over the USS Constitution during a ceremony honoring her father's service. As she prepared for bed, Sarah thought about the day ahead and the careful balance she would need to maintain. She would continue to be the quiet new girl, the military kid who kept to herself and didn't cause trouble. Madison and her friends would continue to see her as beneath their notice, which was exactly what Sarah wanted. She had no way of knowing that this time would be different. She couldn't predict that in just a few months, a chance encounter would shatter her carefully constructed anonymity and force her classmates to confront their own assumptions about worth and respect. She had no idea that the girl they dismissed as poor and powerless was actually growing up in a world of classified briefings and international diplomacy, or that her quiet strength came from watching her father make decisions that affected thousands of service members around the globe. For now, Sarah Martinez was just another new student trying to survive high school. But beneath her humble exterior lay the disciplined mind of someone raised in military excellence, someone who understood duty, honor, and service in ways her classmates couldn't imagine. The question wasn't whether her secret would eventually come out. In a military town, secrets rarely stayed hidden forever. The question was what would happen when it did, and whether the people who had dismissed her so easily would be ready to face the truth about who they had been cruel to. As Sarah drifted off to sleep in her new room, in her new town, at her new school, she had no idea that her carefully guarded secret was about to become the catalyst for one of the most important lessons her classmates would ever learn. Sometimes the people you least expect to matter are the ones who matter most of all. 3 weeks into the school year, Sarah had settled into a routine of careful invisibility at Lincoln High School. She arrived early to avoid the crowds, ate lunch alone in the library, and left immediately when the final bell rang. Her strategy of staying under the radar had worked perfectly, too perfectly perhaps. Madison Thornfield and her group of friends had moved beyond simply ignoring Sarah to actively targeting her. It started small the way these things usually do. Madison would accidentally bump into Sarah in the hallway, causing her to drop her books. Emma would make loud comments about Sarah's clothes within earshot, wondering aloud how someone could appear in public wearing such obviously used outfits. Their friend Jessica would wrinkle her nose when Sarah walked by, as if she smelled something unpleasant. Sarah endured it all with the stoic patience her father had taught her. Sometimes the best response is no response. Admiral Martinez had told her years ago when dealing with a difficult situation at another school. Let people reveal their character through their actions, while you maintain your dignity through yours. But Madison was growing bolder, frustrated by Sarah's lack of reaction to her subtle cruelties. She had expected tears, anger, or at least some sign that her campaign was working. Instead, Sarah simply went about her business with quiet determination, which somehow made Madison even more determined to break through that calm exterior. The escalation began during fourth period on a Tuesday in early October.
Sarah was sitting in chemistry class, taking careful notes on molecular structures, when Madison leaned over and whispered loud enough for nearby students to hear.
"I heard your dad is just a janitor on the naval base," Madison said with fake sympathy.
That must be so embarrassing. I mean, my dad owns 3 car dealerships and a construction company. What does your dad actually do? Clean toilets? Sarah's pen stopped moving for just a moment. She knew that responding would only encourage Madison, but the insult to her father, a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, cut deeper than any comment about her clothes or social status ever could. "My father serves his country with honor," Sarah said quietly, not looking up from her notebook. Madison laughed. Oh, how dramatic. Serves his country by mopping floors and fixing broken sinks. How noble. Emma giggled from the seat behind them. Maybe he can get a promotion to window washer. The comment sparked laughter from several other students who were listening. Sarah felt her face burn with shame and anger, but she forced herself to remain silent. She couldn't defend her father's actual position without revealing their secret, and she knew that any other response would only fuel Madison's cruelty. After class, Madison cornered Sarah at her locker. You know what I don't understand about you? Madison said, her voice dripping with false curiosity. You act like you're better than everyone else, like you have some big secret or something. But we all know you're just another poor military brat whose daddy couldn't make it in the real world. I never said I was better than anyone, Sarah replied, carefully organizing her textbooks.
You don't have to say it, Emma chimed in.
It's in the way you carry yourself, like you think you're special. Newsflash, you're not. You're nobody. Sarah closed her locker and walked away without responding. But Madison wasn't finished. She followed Sarah down the hallway, her voice getting louder and more animated. Where are you going? Don't you want to defend your precious daddy? Or maybe you can't because deep down you know we're right. He's probably just another failed soldier who couldn't cut it in combat, so they stuck him behind a desk or gave him a mop. Sarah stopped walking. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she fought the urge to tell Madison exactly who her father was and what he had accomplished. Admiral James Martinez had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, received the Navy Cross for Valor Under Fire, and been personally decorated by 2 presidents for his strategic leadership. He was currently overseeing naval operations in the Pacific Theater and had turned down positions in the Pentagon because he preferred active duty assignments. But Sarah couldn't say any of that without destroying the careful anonymity they had built, so she stood there in silence while Madison continued her verbal assault, drawing a crowd of curious students who seemed entertained by the drama. Cat got your tongue? Madison taunted. Or maybe you're finally realizing that nobody here is impressed by your sad little military family act. We've all seen your type before, moving around like nomads because your parents can't hold down real jobs in the real world. The crowd was growing larger, students pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming a confrontation. Sarah realized she had to end this before it escalated further, or someone posted a video online that might somehow reach her father's colleagues. I need to get to class, Sarah said simply, trying to push past Madison. But Madison blocked her path. Not so fast. I think it's time someone taught you where you stand in the social order around here. You can't just show up and act like you belong when you clearly don't. Madison, that's enough. The voice came from Jake Morrison, a senior on the football team who rarely involved himself in social drama. Leave her alone. Madison whirled around to face him. Stay out of this, Jake. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when I see someone getting harassed for no reason. Jake replied. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made people listen when he spoke. She hasn't done anything to you. She doesn't have to do anything. Madison shot back. She just doesn't belong here. This is our school, our territory. People like her need to learn their place. Jake looked at Sarah with something that might have been sympathy. People like her? What exactly does that mean? Madison's face flushed with anger. You know what it means. Poor military kids who move around like gypsies, never putting down roots, never contributing anything to the communities they invade. They take advantage of local resources and then disappear when it's convenient. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She had heard variations of this sentiment before, at other schools from other students who resented military families. They saw the constant relocations as instability rather than service, viewed military benefits as unearned advantages rather than compensation for sacrifice. My father has served this country for 22 years, Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. He's missed birthdays, holidays, and school events because he was deployed overseas protecting the freedom that allows you to stand here and say these things. Madison rolled her eyes. Oh, please, spare us the patriotic speech. Every military brat uses the same lines. Your dad chose a job that requires traveling just like a traveling salesman or a circus performer. Don't pretend it's some great sacrifice. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. The comparison of her father's distinguished career to a circus performer was so absurd, so ignorant, that she almost laughed. If only Madison knew that Admiral Martinez regularly briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that foreign dignitaries requested meetings with him, that his strategic decisions had prevented conflicts and saved countless lives. But she couldn't say any of that. She could only stand there and take it while Madison continued her assault. You know what I think? Madison said, warming to her theme. I think your father is probably just a supply clerk or something equally boring. You act mysterious about it because you're ashamed. Well, you should be ashamed. Real men make real money in the civilian world. They don't hide behind uniforms and government paychecks.
The crowd around them had grown to include at least 30 students, all watching the drama unfold with the fascination of spectators at a train wreck. Sarah could see phone cameras pointed in her direction, recording her humiliation for posterity.
That's enough, Jake said firmly. You've made your point, Madison. Let it go. But Madison was beyond reason now, intoxicated by the attention and the feeling of power that came from publicly destroying someone else. No, I don't think I've made my point at all. I think little Miss Military Brat needs to understand something very clearly. She stepped closer to Sarah, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that still carried to the surrounding crowd. You are nothing here. Your father is nothing. Your family is nothing. You live off the charity of taxpayers who work real jobs and pay real taxes so that people like your daddy can play soldier and pretend they matter. But you don't matter. None of you do. Sarah felt tears threatening behind her eyes, not from Madison's insults, but from the sheer injustice of it all. Her father had risked his life repeatedly for his country, had made decisions that affected national security, had sacrificed personal relationships and family time in service to something larger than himself. To hear his service dismissed as playing soldier, to have his sacrifices minimized and mocked, was almost more than she could bear. You're wrong, Sarah said quietly, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion. Madison smiled triumphantly, sensing weakness. Am I? Then prove it. Tell us all what your daddy really does. That's so important. What's his big, impressive job? Sarah opened her mouth and then closed it again. She couldn't reveal the truth without breaking the promise she had made to her father, without potentially compromising his position or putting him in an awkward situation with his new command. She was trapped by her own loyalty and discretion. That's what I thought, Madison said with satisfaction. You can't prove it because there's nothing to prove. Your father is nobody special, and neither are you. The bell rang, signaling the end of passing period, and the crowd began to disperse. Students hurried to their next classes, many still whispering about what they had witnessed. Sarah stood frozen in the hallway, watching Madison and her friends walk away laughing, probably already planning how they would embellish the story for maximum entertainment value. Jake Morrison lingered for a moment, seeming to want to say something comforting. But what could he say? From his perspective, Sarah was exactly what she appeared to be. A military kid whose father worked on the base in some unspecified capacity. He had no way of knowing that he had just witnessed the daughter of one of the Navy's most senior officers being publicly humiliated by someone who wouldn't qualify to shine her father's shoes. Don't let them get to you, Jake said finally. Madison has issues with anyone who doesn't bow down to her. It's not really about you. Sarah nodded numbly, not trusting herself to speak. She gathered her scattered books and made her way to her next class, trying to ignore the stares and whispers that followed her down the hallway. The rest of the day was a blur of sympathetic looks from teachers who had heard about the confrontation and knowing smirks from students who sided with Madison. Sarah moved through her classes like a ghost, mechanically taking notes and participating when required, but feeling disconnected from everything around her. At lunch, she skipped the cafeteria entirely and hid in the library bathroom, where she finally allowed herself to cry. Not for the insults to herself, she had developed thick skin after years of similar encounters, but for the unfairness of not being able to defend her father's honor and service. The afternoon brought no relief. Word of the hallway confrontation had spread throughout the school, growing and changing with each retelling. By the time Sarah boarded the bus to go home, she had apparently been reduced to tears, had begged Madison for mercy, and had admitted that her father was indeed a janitor. None of it was true. But truth seemed irrelevant in the face of a good story. Sarah stared out the bus window as familiar landmarks flashed by, thinking about military families she had known over the years. Children of generals who were treated like royalty at some schools and outcasts at others, kids whose parents had top-secret clearances but who were dismissed as just another military brat by classmates who had no concept of what their families really did. She thought about her friend Marcus, whose father was a Navy SEAL, attending school under an assumed name because of operational security requirements. Or Amanda, whose mother was a military intelligence officer, pretending her mom worked in computers when she actually analyzed terrorist threats and planned covert operations. Military children learned early to compartmentalize their lives, to separate their family's reality from their public persona. It was a burden that civilian kids never had to carry, the weight of secrets that couldn't be shared, achievements that couldn't be celebrated, sacrifices that couldn't be acknowledged. When Sarah arrived home that afternoon, she found her father in the garage working on their car. He was dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a polo shirt, looking like any suburban dad performing weekend maintenance.
The contrast between this image and his actual position was so stark that it almost made Sarah laugh, if she hadn't felt so miserable.
"How was school?" Admiral Martinez asked, looking up from under the hood.
"Fine," Sarah replied automatically, the same response she had given every day for 3 weeks. But something in her voice made her father look more closely at her face. He saw the signs of a difficult day, the slight redness around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself as if preparing for another blow. "Sarah," he said gently, wiping his hands on a shop rag, "what really happened today?" Sarah hesitated. She had been protecting her father from the smaller cruelties of her school life, not wanting to burden him with problems he couldn't solve without revealing his identity. But today had been different. Today had crossed a line she hadn't even known existed. "Some girls at school were saying things," she said carefully. "About military families, about you." Admiral Martinez set down his tools and gave Sarah his full attention. "What kind of things?" Sarah struggled to find a way to explain without revealing how much the comments had hurt her. Just the usual stuff. That we're nobody special, that military people are just playing soldier, that you chose an easy job because you couldn't make it in the real world. Her father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had heard similar sentiments before, usually from people who had never served and had no understanding of what military service actually entailed. It was always painful to hear such dismissive comments about an institution he had dedicated his life to. But it was worse when those comments hurt his daughter. "You know that's not true," he said quietly. "Of course I know that," Sarah replied, "but I can't tell them who you really are or what you really do. So I just have to stand there and take it." Admiral Martinez pulled his daughter into a hug, feeling the weight of the impossible position he had put her in. His career had brought him great satisfaction and professional achievement, but the cost to Sarah's social life was something he struggled with every day. "I'm sorry, Mija," he said.
"I know it's not fair."
Sarah held on to her father tightly, drawing strength from his presence. She knew that tomorrow would bring more of the same. Madison and her friends emboldened by today's perceived victory. Other students who had witnessed her humiliation feeling free to join in the mockery. She would have to walk those hallways with her head held high, pretending that the words didn't hurt, protecting secrets that she sometimes wished she could shout from the rooftops. But she also knew that she came from a family that understood duty and sacrifice, that had served something larger than themselves for generations. Her father had faced down enemy fire and international crises with the same quiet strength he was showing her now. If he could carry the weight of national security decisions and classified operations without complaint, she could carry the weight of a few mean comments from ignorant teenagers. Neither of them knew that the confrontation that day had been witnessed by someone whose father worked in base security, or that word of the incident was already making its way through the network of military families in the area. They had no idea that Sarah's careful anonymity was about to be shattered, not by her own choice, but by the protective instincts of the military community itself. Sometimes secrets have a way of revealing themselves at exactly the right moment, when the people keeping them have suffered enough and the people who need to learn from them are finally ready to listen. Sarah Martinez was about to discover that the military family she had been protecting was also protecting her in ways she never could have imagined. The revelation came 3 weeks later, on a cold November morning, that would change everything at Lincoln High School. Sarah arrived at school to find the parking lot buzzing with unusual activity. News vans, camera crews, and clusters of excited students all focused on something happening near the main entrance. Sarah tried to slip around the crowd unnoticed, but she could hear fragments of conversation that made her blood run cold. "The Admiral is supposed to arrive at 9 o'clock. My dad said he's the youngest 4-star in Navy history. Channel 7 wants to interview students about having such a famous person's daughter at our school." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as the pieces fell into place. Somehow, someone had discovered who her father was, and now the carefully constructed anonymity she had maintained for 3 weeks was about to be destroyed in the most public way possible. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and saw 17 missed calls from her father, along with a text message that simply read, "Emergency at school. Coming to get you." Stay calm. But staying calm was impossible when Sarah could see Madison Thornfield standing near the news crew, her face pale with what looked like growing horror as she spoke to a reporter. Even from a distance, Sarah could see that Madison was beginning to understand the magnitude of what she had done. The crowd parted as a black SUV with government plates pulled into the circular drive. Sarah watched in fascination and dread as her father stepped out, not in the civilian clothes she was used to seeing at home, but in his full dress uniform. The morning sun caught the gold braids on his shoulders, the rows of ribbons on his chest, and the 4 stars that marked him as one of the most senior officers in the United States Navy. Admiral James Martinez walked with the bearing of a man accustomed to command, his presence immediately commanding attention and respect from everyone in the vicinity. Students who had been chattering excitedly fell silent as he approached, suddenly understanding that they were in the presence of someone far more important than they had imagined. Sarah watched her father scan the crowd until his eyes found hers. She saw relief flash across his face when he spotted her, followed by something that looked like grim determination. He spoke briefly to the principal, who had materialized at his side with obvious nervousness, and then began walking directly towards Sarah. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea. Students stepped back instinctively, some snapping photos with their phones, others simply staring in awe at the uniform and insignia that marked Admiral Martinez as one of the most powerful military leaders in the country.
Sarah felt every eye in the parking lot turn to her as her father approached. She could hear whispers starting up behind her. That's his daughter? The quiet new girl? The one Madison was making fun of? Admiral Martinez reached his daughter and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder.
"Are you all right?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people listen even when he whispered. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She was mortified by the attention, but also filled with a strange sense of pride as she looked at her father in his full uniform. This was who he really was. Not the man in jeans working on the car, but Admiral James Martinez, decorated war hero and strategic military leader.
"Sir?" The principal approached nervously, clearly out of his depth in dealing with such a high-ranking military official. "If we could perhaps move this inside."
The media attention is... Admiral Martinez nodded curtly. "Of course. Sarah, come with me."
As they walked toward the school entrance, Sarah became aware of the absolute silence that had fallen over the crowd. Every student, every teacher, every reporter was watching the quiet new girl they had dismissed as nobody special walk beside one of the most important military leaders in the country.
She could see Madison standing frozen near the flagpole, her face a mask of shock and dawning comprehension. Emma was beside her, equally stunned, her mouth hanging open as she processed what she was witnessing. The group of students who had laughed at Sarah's sad military family were now staring at her with something approaching awe. Inside the principal's office, Sarah learned how her secret had been exposed.
Mrs. Jennifer Collins, whose husband was a security officer at the naval base, had been at the grocery store when she overheard Madison bragging to her friends about how she had put that military brat in her place the previous afternoon.
She was describing the incident in detail, Mrs. Collins explained to Sarah and her father. Talking about how she had told some girl that her father was probably just a janitor, how she had humiliated her in front of half the school. She mentioned the girl's name, Sarah Martinez. Admiral Martinez's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "And you recognize the name?"
"My husband mentioned that Admiral Martinez had a daughter starting at Lincoln High this year," Mrs. Collins continued.
"When I heard what this girl had said to Sarah, how she had mocked your service," she shook her head. "I couldn't let it stand. I called the school this morning to report bullying behavior, and I may have mentioned who Sarah's father actually is." Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. She was grateful that someone had stood up for her and her father, but mortified that her carefully guarded secret was now public knowledge. "The media found out from there," the principal added apologetically. "Once word got out that Admiral Martinez's daughter attends our school, the news stations started calling. They want to do a story about military families and education, about the sacrifices made by service members and their children." Admiral Martinez looked at his daughter. "Sarah, I know this isn't what we planned. If you want, we can transfer you to another school, maybe one on base where military families are more common." Sarah thought about it for a moment. She could start over again. Find new anonymity. Avoid the complications that came with being Admiral Martinez's daughter. But she was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of watching people insult her father's service while she stood silently by.
"No,"
she said quietly. "I want to stay." Her father raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? This won't be easy. People will treat you differently now." Sarah nodded. Maybe it's time they did. When they emerged from the principal's office 20 minutes later,
Sarah was surprised to find Jake Morrison waiting in the hallway.
The senior football player approached them with obvious nervousness, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked like shame. "Excuse me, sir." Jake addressed Admiral Martinez with the respect due his rank.
"I'm Jake Morrison. I was wondering if I could speak with Sarah for a moment."
Admiral Martinez looked at his daughter, who nodded her permission.
"Make it quick," he said. "Sarah has missed enough class time already." Jake turned to Sarah, his face flushed with embarrassment.
"I wanted to apologize," he said, "for what happened yesterday, for not doing more to stop it. I had no idea who you were, but that doesn't matter. What Madison did was wrong regardless." Sarah studied his face, trying to gauge whether his apology was genuine or simply motivated by the discovery of her father's position. What she saw there was real remorse, the look of someone who had witnessed injustice and failed to act decisively. "Thank you," she said simply. "I appreciate that." Jake glanced at Admiral Martinez, who was listening with the careful attention of a father evaluating his daughter's classmates. "Sir, I want you to know that not all of us feel the way Madison does about military families. My grandfather served in Vietnam, and I have nothing but respect for what you and your family have sacrificed for our country."
Admiral Martinez nodded approvingly. "Thank you, son. That means more than you know."
As Jake walked away, Sarah and her father made their way to the parking lot. The media crews were gone, presumably following the story to get background information from the naval base. But clusters of students remained, watching Sarah with new eyes as she walked beside her father. Sarah could hear whispers following in their wake. "I can't believe we didn't know. She never said anything. Madison must feel like such an idiot. Did you see all those medals on his uniform?" At the car, Admiral Martinez turned to his daughter. "Last chance to change your mind about staying." Sarah looked back at the school building, thinking about Madison and Emma and all the other students who had dismissed her as unworthy of their attention. She thought about the mean comments, the casual cruelty, the way they had mocked her father's service, without knowing anything about what he had actually done for his country. "I'm staying," she said firmly.
"They need to learn that they don't know as much as they think they do." Her father smiled, recognizing his own stubborn determination in his daughter's voice. "All right then.
But remember, with privilege comes responsibility. People will expect more from you now, and they'll be watching how you handle this situation."
Sarah nodded, understanding. She was no longer just another military kid trying to blend in.
She was Admiral Martinez's daughter, and that came with certain expectations about grace, dignity, and forgiveness. The rest of the school day was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Students who had ignored her for weeks suddenly wanted to be her friend. Teachers who had barely noticed her presence now went out of their way to acknowledge her contributions to class discussions. The transformation was so complete and so rapid that it was almost disorienting. But the most dramatic change was in Madison Thornfield. The girl who had spent weeks tormenting Sarah now seemed to shrink whenever they passed in the hallway. Madison's usual confident swagger was replaced by a hunched defensive posture, as if she was trying to make herself invisible. The same posture Sarah had perfected over years of military relocations. During lunch, Sarah was surprised when Madison approached her table with obvious reluctance. The cafeteria fell silent as students watched the confrontation that everyone had been anticipating. "Can I sit down?" Madison asked quietly, her voice lacking its usual arrogant edge. Sarah gestured to the empty chair across from her, curious to hear what Madison had to say. Madison sat down heavily, her expensive designer clothes somehow looking shabby in the harsh fluorescent lighting. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I said about you and your father, I was wrong. Really, really wrong." Sarah waited, saying nothing. "I saw the news story," Madison continued. "About your dad's service record, about the medals he's won, about the things he's done. I had no idea." "You didn't want to know," Sarah replied calmly. "You made assumptions based on my clothes and where I shopped, and you decided I wasn't worth knowing anything real about." Madison flinched as if she'd been slapped. "You're right. I judged you without knowing anything about you or your family. I said horrible things about your father's service, and I was completely wrong." Sarah studied Madison's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus damage control. What she saw there was real shame, the kind that comes from discovering you've been cruel to someone who deserved better. "My father has served 3 combat tours," Sarah said quietly. "He's been shot at, bombed, and threatened more times than I can count. He's missed my birthdays and Christmas mornings because he was halfway around the world protecting people like you. He's one of the most decorated officers in the Navy, and he saved more lives than you could imagine. Madison's eyes filled with tears. I know. I saw the articles online. The Navy Cross, the Bronze Star. The commendations from foreign governments.
I can't believe I called him what I called him. Sarah felt no satisfaction in Madison's distress.
If anything, she felt sorry for her former tormentor. Madison had revealed her own character through her cruelty, and now she had to live with the consequences of that revelation. The worst part, Madison continued, is that even if your father was a janitor, even if he was exactly what I said he was, that wouldn't make it okay to treat you the way I did. There's nothing wrong with honest work, no matter what kind it is. This surprised Sarah. She had expected apologies and excuses, but not this kind of self-reflection. You're right, Sarah agreed. My father's rank doesn't make me better than anyone else, just like your father's money doesn't make you better than me. We're all just people trying to figure out how to get through high school. Madison nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Is there anything I can do to make this right? I know I can't take back what I said, but Sarah considered the question. She could demand public humiliation, could make Madison grovel for forgiveness, could use her father's position to ensure that Madison faced serious consequences for her behavior. But what would that accomplish? Stop judging people based on what you think you know about them, Sarah said finally. Stop assuming that expensive clothes or family money makes someone more valuable than anyone else. And maybe think about using your influence to build people up instead of tearing them down. Madison nodded eagerly. I will. I promise. As Madison walked away, Sarah reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 3 weeks ago, she had been nobody special, just another military kid trying to blend in. Now, she was the center of attention, treated with a respect that had nothing to do with her own actions, and everything to do with her father's achievements. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same students who had dismissed her as worthless when they thought her father was just an enlisted man now treated her like royalty because he was an admiral. They hadn't bothered to get to know her as a person before, and they weren't really getting to know her as a person now. They were simply reacting to a title and a rank. But perhaps that was a lesson worth teaching. Perhaps Madison and the others needed to understand that they never really knew who they were dealing with when they decided to be cruel to someone. The quiet kid in the corner might be the child of a Nobel Prize winner. The girl in thrift store clothes might be the daughter of a billionaire who chose to live modestly. The boy with the foreign accent might be the son of a diplomat or a refugee who had survived unimaginable hardship. You never knew someone's story until you took the time to learn it. And by then, it was too late to undo the damage caused by assumptions and prejudice. Over the following weeks, Sarah watched the social dynamics at Lincoln High School shift in interesting ways. Madison's friends began treating her with newfound respect, but Sarah could see that it was superficial, based on her father's position rather than any real understanding of who she was as a person. More importantly, she noticed changes in how Madison and her group treated other students. The casual cruelty that had been their trademark became less common. They seemed more careful about their assumptions, more aware of the possibility that they might be wrong about someone's background or worth. Jake Morrison started eating lunch at Sarah's table, bringing other athletes with him who were interested in hearing about military life and her experiences living around the world. These conversations were genuine, based on curiosity rather than social calculation. Most surprisingly, Sarah found herself becoming something of an advocate for other military children at the school. When a new student arrived whose father was deployed overseas, Sarah made sure he wasn't eating alone. When a girl in her math class mentioned that her mother was a Marine, Sarah reached out to make connections and provide support. Her father noticed the changes when they talked over dinner each evening. Sarah was more engaged with school life, more willing to form friendships, more confident in her interactions with classmates. The burden of secrecy had been lifted, and with it the isolation that had defined her educational experience for so many years. Are you happy we stayed? Admiral Martinez asked one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. Sarah considered the question. Her life was certainly more complicated now. She dealt with students who wanted to be her friend for the wrong reasons. Teachers who expected her to be perfect because of her father's reputation, and the occasional reporter who wanted to interview the Admiral's daughter about military family life. But she also had real friends now, people who knew her whole story and liked her for who she was rather than what they thought she could do for them. She had found her voice as an advocate for military families and other students who didn't fit neatly into traditional social categories. Most importantly, she had learned that hiding who you are doesn't protect you from judgment. It just delays the inevitable moment when people discover the truth. Better to face that judgment honestly and let people reveal their character through their responses.
Yes, she said finally. I'm glad we stayed.
I think everyone learned something important, including me. Her father smiled, recognizing the wisdom in his daughter's words. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most difficult situations. And sometimes the people who seem the most different from us are the ones who teach us the most about ourselves.
Sarah Martinez had entered Lincoln High School as the invisible new girl, determined to blend in and avoid attention. She was leaving it as someone who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to claim her place in the world. The journey from anonymity to recognition had been painful at times, but it had also been transformative, not just for Sarah but for everyone who witnessed it. The girl they had picked on, not knowing the Admiral was among them, had taught them all a lesson they would never forget. You never really know who you're dealing with until you take the time to find out, and by then, your character has already been revealed through your choices.
Some secrets are worth keeping, but some truths are worth fighting for. And sometimes the quiet person in the corner has the most important story of all.